All right, here we are in this beautiful day. Kind of beautiful. It depends. If snow is kind of pretty, we're supposed to get a lot of it, as you know. So I guess we're going to be inside for a while. But anyway, let's get back to where we left off with supply and demand. Okay, so let's go back to Moodle and get this stuff open again. And let's see, Moodle is kicking around here somewhere. Here we go. So let's go to our course. And yes, okay. So we're getting close to the end of our discussion about supply and demand. We're not quite there yet. And when this is done, we'll be looking at a very different topic. We're going to be looking at gross domestic product, which represents the output of all the goods and services produced in the country during a given year. But first, we want to carry on with our discussion about supply and demand. The one thing we did not quite get around to doing yet is bringing them together. Okay, in other words, we've been analyzing them separately. And so we know all the factors that determine supply and demand individually. And I think we did get them together to define equilibrium. I'm pretty sure we did that. Let's jump ahead and look at our examples. And so, yeah, we brought them together and showed what it looks like when we're in equilibrium. We also explained what happens when we're not in equilibrium. For example, we looked at the case of the shortage, when the price is too low, when people want to buy more of the product than is available in the marketplace. We call that a shortage. And of course, what that means is that the price will start to rise, and eventually the shortage will take care of itself. We also saw the opposite situation with the surplus, where the price is too high and there's more of the product available than people actually want to buy at that price. And you can tell right away because the shelves, when you go to the store, are full of this product. Whereas with this shortage, it's the other way around. You go to the store and the whatever it is gone because there's not enough of it. So then what was next for us to study is what happens if the supply and the demand curves change. So I just want to point out one more time, I think we already discussed this before, but if we shift up and down the same demand curve due to a change in the price, we call that a change in quantity demanded. All right. So this diagram we're seeing here represents what we're going to call a change in quantity demanded. And so here, for example, if the pizzerias lower their price from 12 to 10, the number of pizzas that will be purchased at those prices will go up from 4 to 5. So nothing's changed here except the price of the pizza. So we're going to simply move up and down the same demand curve. So in economics, we call that a change in quantity demanded. Now, what happens if something else changes, something other than price? In other words, something that's being held constant along this curve. And now we know several factors that can change, and they will in fact affect the entire relationship between the price of the good and the quantity demanded. So these types of changes, which refer to anything except the price, are known as a change in demand because the entire relationship is changing. And the way that is reflected graphically is with a shift of the entire demand curve. All right, so let's see some examples of this. Okay, so let's try this case. Suppose a consumer incomes increase. Now, assuming that the product here, the pizza, is a normal good, which I think we can all agree that it is, if people have more income, they will want to buy more of every product in the market, or at least every normal product. And so we say then that the demand for these goods increases. The demand increases. Now, again, let me point out here that here, in this case, when only the price changes, there's a change in the quantity demanded. Here, some outside factor has changed, namely the income of consumers, and so we have a change in demand. Specifically, in this example, the demand increases. And so I'm going to show you what that could look like. Let's go back to our demand schedule for this pizza. And what we're going to see is that at the new income level, people are willing to buy more pizza at every possible price. So let's see what that would look like. So here's the original curve, and you can see all we've done here is shifted or added 2 more million pizzas to the quantity demanded at every possible price. So people have more money to spend, and of course they're going to spend it. And so here we're assuming that that translates into an increase in the demand for pizza. And no matter what the price is, we're going to buy more than we used to at the old price. So how does that show up on the graph? Let's find out. There we go. So in other words, the entire demand curve is at a higher level. So in other words, when we originally had a price of 10, you might recall that people were willing to buy 5 million pizzas. But now, when the price is 10, people are willing to buy 7 million pizzas. So that's how you can tell that the curve must be in a different location, because everything's shifted to the right to remind us that at the new higher income level, people are willing to buy more pizza no matter what the price is. And so the entire relationship has shifted. In other words, this is because our willingness to buy the pizza is different than it was with our lower incomes. And so because of that, the curve has to shift. And so this is an example of a change in demand. And specifically, this is an increase in demand because it can go both ways. And always keep in mind too that whenever there's an increase in demand, we're always going to shift to the right because we're moving further away from the origin. Now, you can probably guess what would happen if our incomes went down. Let's say there's a recession going on. We're going to have less income to spend on every good, and so therefore we'll cut back on those goods. And again, this is assuming normal goods. And so just the opposite would happen. Okay, so I've created another table that represents a decrease in incomes, which could be caused by, let's say, a slowing of the economy. And this time I've subtracted 2 from each of the quantities. And so as a result, you can probably guess what's going to happen. The entire demand curve will shift to the left. Okay, so a decrease means a shift to the left. Why? Because at the same price, people are willing to buy less pizza. So now, for example, let's say the price is still $10 in the marketplace. Originally, we were willing to buy 5 million pizzas at that price. Now, we're only willing to buy 3. So the shift is due to a decrease in income. And so we call this, it's a change in demand, but it's specifically a decrease in demand. Okay, so we call that a decrease in demand. And it's just the opposite of what we had before. And of course, I did mention this before, any factor that changes other than price will cause the same thing to happen. Either the curve will shift to the right or it will shift to the left. So it's up to us to figure out which is which. All right, and that can get very tricky sometimes. All right, so why don't we look at some more examples here? So this is the case of incomes. How about this one? Just because, we could use the practice. And some of these are a little bit trickier than others. Let's say that, as another example, suppose that consumers considered, what would you consider to be a substitute for pizza? How about burgers? To be a substitute for pizzas. What would happen to the demand for pizzas if the price of burgers were to increase? Okay, so these are substitute goods. The burgers just got more expensive. What should happen to our demand curve for pizza?
It will increase.
Well, that's exactly right. So in other words, the demand for pizza will increase. Now, again, you notice this is something other than the actual price of the pizza. The pizza price didn't change. The demand for pizza will increase so that the demand curve will shift to the right. And that, of course, indicates that if the price of the burgers goes down, on the other hand, if the price of the burgers were to decrease, the demand for pizza would decrease. Why? Because burgers are suddenly cheaper. At least some people would switch from pizzas to burgers. So therefore, the demand for pizzas would decrease, and therefore, as a result, the demand curve will shift to the left. All right, does that make sense?
So if there's no shift in the supply curve, we'll go to a new equilibrium?
Exactly. And that's what's coming up next. I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is the very next topic we're going to consider. And we're going to see some graphs to prove this. With no change in supply, an increase in demand will cause both the equilibrium price and quantity to rise, but a decrease in demand will cause both of them to fall. And we're going to see graphically why this is happening. So yes, because these are factors that are not affecting the supply. So they're only affecting the demand. The supply curve stays where it is. And so therefore, when the demand curve shifts, we're going to define a new equilibrium point. So let's go back to the case where there's an increase in the demand for the pizza due to higher incomes. So this is the curve. Now remember, before the equilibrium was $10. Now it's $12, at which price there'll be more supplied and more demanded. In other words, people are willing to buy more pizzas, but with the understanding that they have to pay more if they expect to have more pizzas. That's because the cost of producing the pizza hasn't changed. So from the supplier's perspective, they're willing to do this, but they need to have more money. Because let's say now to make more pizzas, they may have to buy more equipment or hire more workers or whatever the case may be. So therefore, that cost will be passed along to the consumer. And so graphically, you can see that there's a new equilibrium point that results from this. And the price went up, and so did the quantity. So with an increase in demand, with no change in supply, the price goes up and the quantity goes up. And if you forget, just draw the picture. And also don't forget that a shift to the right means an increase. This is always an increase. And also don't forget, this had to be caused by something other than the price of the good. This happened to be caused by higher incomes. So I'll make a note of that up here. Higher incomes lead to an increase in demand, and that shifts the curve, and we now suddenly find ourselves with a new higher price and quantity in equilibrium. Now, of course, in the opposite scenario, if the consumer incomes are falling, then all of this should work in reverse, and it does. All right, so I'll give everybody a second to catch up, and then we'll see the graph for a decrease in demand caused by a reduction in incomes. All right, are we ready? Okay. Yeah, one of the real negative things about this online stuff is that it's very hard for me to tell if I'm getting it too far ahead of everyone. So if you feel like you're getting behind, you just let me know. Just put it in the chat room, because I can't really see you. I mean, yes, I can see some of your faces when the camera's on, but even then, it's hard for me to judge if you're, keeping up or not. Except unless you start to look really stressed out. In the classroom, it's as obvious as can be when somebody's not catching up. Okay, now it's sort of like a guessing game. So you just let me know if I'm getting too far ahead. Anyway, so I think we're ready. Let's try the opposite case where the demand goes down. Again, because of lower incomes, and look what happens. Instead of having an equilibrium price of 10 and a quantity of 5, the price is only 8, and only 4 million pizzas are being sold. The only way that can happen is if the entire curve shifts to the left. So there's lower incomes.
I'm just a bit confused.
Okay, go ahead.
What's equilibrium mean in this situation?
Oh, it means that the quantity supplied matches the quantity demanded, which means that what the producers are willing to sell is what we're willing to buy.
Okay.
It means everybody's happy, basically.
All right.
We want 5 million pizzas. They want to sell us 5 million pizzas. Okay, so we're right there. Equilibrium. Like I said, think of it as everybody's happy. And that also means that there's no tendency for the price to change because everything is in balance now. This is where we should be, unless some exterior factor changes. For the time being, this is equilibrium. So everybody is happy. All right. We saw before with a surplus and a shortage, people are not happy. But here, there's a balance between the quantity that's being produced or supplied and the amount that people are buying. All right. So here we go. We have lower incomes, which triggers a decrease in demand. And the curve shifts to the left. And so because of that, the equilibrium price is only 8 and the equilibrium quantity is only 5. So they both went down. Okay. And again, this can be caused by a lot of things, but we're assuming here that it's lower incomes. It could also be for other reasons, like maybe people are just losing their taste for pizza. Yeah, right. Can you imagine a society that doesn't love pizza? It can't happen. It is not possible. Okay. That's just the reality. Pizza is, let's just say, beloved by just about everybody. Okay. But yes, there are other products where this could happen. Well, then, you know what will happen? They'll figure out a way to make the dough gluten-free then. And then we'll be all happy again about pizza. No, if you notice, there's a lot more gluten-free products than ever before on the marketplace. The problem with gluten-free apparently is that the texture is very strange compared to what you're used to. It's not easy to replicate the texture. And I can't speak for the taste. I've never eaten anything that's gluten-free because I don't have to. But for people who are gluten-free, that's the only option they have. So a lot of research is going on, let's say, to figure out how to make more gluten-free products for everyone in case they need them without it tasting like crap. Okay, I mean, or people having to give it up altogether. But I can't imagine what could you eat if you couldn't eat gluten? It's everywhere. Like pasta. Can you imagine a life without pasta? Oh my God. Although,
Pasta, and I really like it, but it's probably not everyone's thing.
no, probably not. But I'll tell you something that's even worse. I've actually met people who are allergic to shellfish. If I were allergic to shellfish, I think I might be tempted to end it all right now because I'm telling you, no lobsters, no clams, oh my God, it's impossible to imagine life like that. But some poor souls have to live their life that way. So, but the gluten-free part, yes, they're working on it. Oh no, no, oh no. Oh, I'm so sorry for you. Wow. Because the thing about shellfish, if you are allergic to it, you're not just a little allergic to it. It's bad news, isn't it? Yeah, it's bad news. So, wow, I'm very sorry to hear that. But I don't think they're going to find a way to make gluten-free, lobsters that are, because we don't even know what the problem is. But anyway, but the gluten-free stuff, oh, almonds, huh? Well, all right, that's not as bad as shellfish. I have to grant you that one, but it's still sad when you're allergic to anything because you're going to spend all your time obsessing about what almonds taste like, aren't you? Like, oh man, if only I could have an almond. I wish I could have almonds. Well, I don't know. I'm not allergic to anything, so I don't know, but I'm just guessing it can't be fun. Tree nuts and gluten too, man. That's sad. Oh wow. but at least there's hope as far as the gluten goes. I don't think there's anything they can do about the nuts, but the gluten, at least, you notice a lot more products are becoming available that are gluten-free. So at least you have that going for you. Like even cakes. I don't know how they manage to have cakes without gluten, but there are ways of doing it apparently. All right. Well, anyway, so this is the opposite case. This is the reduction in demand. Now, the next thing we want to consider is what happens if there are changes in supply other than changes in the price. So we can have an increase in supply. Oh, no, before we do that, we have to make the same distinction here. A change in quantity supplied means there's a change in the price only, just like the quantity demanded. Okay, so let's see. Do I have a picture of that? Yes. So you can see because we're moving up and down the same supply curve, we call this a change in quantity demanded. I'm sorry, supplied. What am I saying? Supplied. And this can only be caused by a change in the price of the pizza. No other factor is responsible for this. So we can move up and down this curve, and that means only the price has changed, nothing else. So you can probably guess what's coming next. If any other factor changes, what do you suppose we're going to call that? How about a change in supply? All right, it's perfectly analogous to what happened with the demand. All right, so anything else causes the entire supply curve to shift, and we're going to call that a change in supply. All right, because now the relationship between what a producer is willing to accept for their product is changing, and so the entire curve will be shifting, bringing us to a new equilibrium position. So just like with the demand, an increase in supply causes the entire curve to shift to the right, whereas a decrease in supply moves us to the left. That never changes. All right, so we don't want any confusion. To the right is always an increase, to the left is always a decrease. Okay. Now, let's look at some examples. Here's the pizza. Ooh, good news. The cost of the tomatoes has gone down. So the pizzeria can now afford to sell you the pizza at a lower price. So the supply will go up as a result. So watch this. Here's the original supply schedule, and I've added 2 million pizzas at every price. So it's a parallel shift. It doesn't have to work like this. As long as they all increase, we have an increase in supply. Yes, exactly, because it's cheaper to make. That's right. It's more profitable to make pizza now, and therefore we will make more. It's just that simple. Okay. Oh, there we go, to the right. So this is an increase in supply, and it's caused due to a reduction in the cost of what we call inputs, meaning inputs into the production process. In this case, it's the tomatoes, because obviously you need tomato sauce to make a pizza. All right, well, I shouldn't say that. There are white pizzas that you can get, which is all cheese, I think, and maybe a bechamel sauce, but nah, the classic pizza has to have tomatoes, don't you think? Yeah. Okay, I don't hear any disagreement. That's what I figured. No, there are other alternatives, but you see these like salad pizzas in this sometimes. Why would anyone want a salad pizza? Isn't that kind of counterproductive? If you want a salad, you have a salad. If you want a pizza, you have a pizza. Why would you mix them together? I don't get that at all. No. But anyway, so the supply goes to the right. Now, remember before initially at a price of 10, we were, let's see. Oh, okay. So at a price of 10, we were previously willing to make 5 million pizzas. Now that goes up to 7. And so the entire relationship shifts, and we call that an increase in supply. And now here's the beauty of this. When we bring it together, well, actually, we'll consider that in a minute. Why don't we switch this around and see what happens if the price of the tomatoes goes up? Okay, all of a sudden it's more expensive to make pizza because the cost of the tomatoes went up. Let's say the crop was ruined by bad weather and the pizzas are terribly expensive. I mean, the tomatoes are terribly expensive this year. And suddenly it's more expensive to make pizza. And so the supply will decrease. And let's just keep it simple and say that at every price, we'll reduce our output by 2 million pizzas. Okay, so you can probably figure out what's going to happen next. The supply curve will shift to the left. All right, and yes, it did. So there's a decrease in supply. Due to an increase. Did I say the wrong thing on the last slide? Hold on. No, I didn't. It's fine. All right, good. I was just concerned that I might have written the wrong thing on the last slide. Here we go. Due to an increase in input prices. And now, for example, at a price of 10, whereas we previously were willing to make 5 million pizzas, now we're only willing to make 3. Now we want to bring these together with the demand curve and see how these changes impact on equilibrium. All right, so let's consider the increase in supply now. And whereas before the equilibrium price was 10, and at that price, the equilibrium quantity and supply were 5. Now, look at that. The price has dropped and the quantity has gone up. So let's look at this thing. Ooh, we like this one. Look what happened. As a result of the increase in supply, the price went down and the quantity went up. So we can have more pizzas and pay a lower price for them. It doesn't get any better than that. All right, more pizzas, lower price. What else do we want? I mean, I guess in a dream world they would be free, but this is okay too. The price went down, the quantity went up. Now, of course, in practice, you see this happening. There's certain types of products where this happens all the time. High-tech products tend to behave like this, like flash drives, for example. What keeps happening to flash drives over time? They get better and cheaper. And this is why, because the technology is advancing, the cost of producing them is falling quite considerably, as a matter of fact. And this is how this keeps happening. All right, now let's consider the opposite case when unfortunately the tomato costs went up, supply went down. Now what's going to happen? Ooh, it's not looking pretty. The price went up to 12 and look at the equilibrium quantity. It's only 4 now. Ouch. So yeah, look at that. The price was 10. The quantity was 5. Oh my God. So this time we're paying a higher price for less pizza. That's not good. Due to higher input prices. And the unfortunate outcome of this is that the price went up and the quantity went down. Sometimes in economics, when this happens, it's referred to as a supply shock, which you can tell by the name, it's bad news. Usually this is reserved to refer to cases where, let's say the price of oil suddenly goes up quite considerably. That would tend to raise the prices of all consumer goods and reduce their quantity of output. That's, of course, the worst thing that could happen. So in the press, if you see the word supply shock, this is what's happening. All right. All right. So now we brought together all of our cases. And in fact, maybe we should summarize this. I think a little summarizing might be nice. So let's look at it this way. All right. This is a change in quantity demanded You notice the magic word quantity there. It doesn't matter up or down. And that's caused by a change in the price. And then we had the equivalent with the supply curve. Any points here with the change in quantities supplied caused by a change in price only. All right, then we have the changes in demand and supply. There's two possibilities. We have change in demand caused by a factor other than price. The price of the good, that is. So we can have a shift to the right or a shift to the left. This one on the right is an increase in demand. And therefore, this one over here must be a decrease in demand. Down below, where supply, everything will be perfectly analogous. We have a change in supply caused by a factor other than price. And so the one on the right is an increase in demand. And this one is a decrease in demand. Okay, then the last thing we want to consider is what about equilibrium? All right, so if everybody's ready, that last one is supply, yes. The top one is demand, this one is supply. Now we're going to combine these to figure out what happens when to equilibrium when we bring everything together. I'm just checking to see if there's anyone who is getting too stressed out. No, this is fun, isn't it? That's right. So here we go. So when we bring them together, there's 4 cases that we need to be aware of. Okay, we'll start with the increase in demand. Which means a rightward shift. I'll tell you what I'll do, just to keep it simple. I'll call this point 1 and 2. It's understood these are equilibrium points. Q1, Q2, P1, P2. And you should be able to tell from the graph that the price went up and the quantity went up. Okay. So people want more of a product. They have to be prepared to pay for it. Okay. How about a decrease in demand? Everything just works in reverse. Okay, so you can see that both of these went down. Which is to be expected because everything just works in reverse here. All right, now, of course, what I still have to cover is the 2 possible changes in supply, and then we'll be ready for something new. Well, not really new, an extension of this. How about an increase in supply, which we just saw basically. All right, so we like this case, that's for sure, because the price went down, the quantity went up. All right, and then of course the decrease in supply will be the exact opposite, because the supply curve will shift to the left. Okay, so we're going to start here, move up here. And so our original equilibrium was right here. We'll call that 0.1. And yeah, look what happens. Oh, bad news. The price went up and the quantity went down. So we're paying more for less of the product. And this often happens when there's a sudden shock in the price of the inputs, like vanilla. If you do any baking, you may have noticed that vanilla is horribly expensive compared to just a few years ago. Apparently, there was something wrong with the vanilla bean crop in Africa, and so the price went through the roof. And you can see this is exactly what's going on. The cost of making it went up significantly, and so there's less of it available, and it's more costly. All right, now, all of this discussion was based on the assumption that markets are perfectly free to adjust themselves as needed when conditions change. What happens if the government interferes in free markets? Well, there's a lot of ways they can do that. What we want to specifically consider is when they interfere with the price system and try to alter the prices that are being charged in free markets. So you can probably imagine that what's coming up will show us that the results are never good. But the two specific cases we want to consider are what are called price ceilings and price floors. And these are artificial obstructions of the free market system by the government. Now, you can probably guess from those names what they refer to. A price ceiling would be a maximum price. And this price floor would be a minimum price. So this happens sometimes. Fortunately, this doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, it can have pretty significant effects. So we're going to look at how these work in general and how they work for specific examples. Now, a price ceiling means the government says, you know what, you may not charge more than X dollars for this product. When do you ever see that in practice? Well, not so much anymore, but in some cities, they still have this. It's called rent control, where the government just arbitrarily decides, you know what, yeah, no matter what the rent is, should be, you know, the tenants don't have to pay more than, let's say, $2,000 a month. Now, a lot of this got started during World War II, I believe. And the unfortunate reality is that they never got rid of it altogether. And so we're going to see how this harms the market for rental units. So here's what happens. It's a maximum rent imposed by a government on the housing market. The price can be less than that amount, but not above it. All right, so let's see what that does. Well, here's all the fun outcomes of this. We have a shortage of housing, we have increased search costs, and we have what's called black market activity. Black markets basically are markets where the activities are either illegal or else, let's say, strongly discouraged by the government. So a classic example of this would be in, countries with a very overbearing government that tries to run everything. The people will take it on themselves to decide, you know what, we're going to do things our way. And so in a lot of these countries where things aren't going so well, there'll often arise a black market in currencies. Let's just as a quick aside. So a country like Venezuela, let's say, where times are tough, people may take it on themselves to not accept the Venezuelan currency, and instead, people will end up using dollars instead of their currency, which is called the bolivar. Now, why would they do that?
Well, as of recently, didn't Venezuela sort of like print a lot of money? So
And that-
their dollar isn't really useful?
That's right. In other words, it's losing a lot of its value. There's a lot of inflation. And if you hold bolivars, their value will depreciate very, very quickly. But will that happen if you hold dollars? No. Now, in a country like this, where, let's face it, I mean, the government is not willing to tolerate a lot of dissent. They may make it officially illegal for people to use dollars, but guess what? They're going to do it anyway because they know that the dollar will retain its value. And so in a country like that, the market for dollars would be considered a black market because it's technically illegal to buy and sell dollars instead of the local currency. But the markets are there anyway because people are willing to take the chance of being caught. And so in other countries, so this happens apparently a lot in Scandinavian countries. The thing that separates Scandinavian countries typically throughout recent history is they tend to have very, very high taxes compared to the rest of Western Europe and certainly the United States. So you hear about little transactions like, here's an example. Suppose that in Scandinavia, a doctor and a lawyer get together and the doctor says, listen, doc, or the doctor says to the lawyer, I need a will. The lawyer says, I need a physical exam. Instead of going to each other and charging each other for those services, what if the doctor trades the physical exam to the lawyer for a will? What has just happened now? Why in the world would they do that?
It's cheaper.
It may be cheaper, but guess what? There's no record of it. And what does that mean?
No taxes.
No taxes, because that would have represented taxable income. So they've evaded the law, the taxes by doing that. That could technically be considered black market activity. Although, I mean, come on. One of them is doing a will and one of them is doing a physical exam. But because they're going out of their way to avoid taxes, that could theoretically be considered black market activity. In the housing market, black market activity could consist of people bribing landlords to let them live there because there's not enough housing to go around. And so you might say, well, landlord, you're limited to charging me $2,000 a month. What if I pay you $1,000 under the table and then you can let me live here anyway? And you're going to get a lot of that whenever the government interferes with the price mechanism. Yeah. So what exactly is going on here? Here's the graph. So here's a city where without rent ceilings, the equilibrium free market rent would be $3,000 a month, and the quantity being rented is $1,500. Fine, no problems. Everybody who wants an apartment, who's willing and able to pay $3,000, has one. Now, along comes the local government, and the government says, oh no, that's too much money. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a rent ceiling of $2,000 in effect. So that means nobody's allowed to pay more than $2,000. We'll show those evil landlords. Now, look what's happening here. Just like with any other case where the price is below the free market equilibrium level, we've got more people wanting to rent than units are available. So what do we call this situation again?
Shortage.
A shortage. Now, with a free market, what would happen?
This would go up.
The price would go up, but guess what? It's not allowed to go up. So what happens to the shortage? The shortage
It continues.
it can't take care of itself. So there's always going to be all these people who have no place to live because of this rule. And so who's benefiting from this? Well, I mean, some people are happy. They're like, wow, I'm only paying $2,000 a month instead of $3,000. But now look at the landlord's position. Can they afford to maintain the building properly now? No. So the quality of the units is likely to suffer. So you can see it's kind of like, who would do something like this? Makes you wonder. But there still exists pockets of rent control in cities like New York and Boston. And especially, apparently, the problem is really bad in Berkeley, California. They don't seem to get with it down there, over there. It's just destroying the housing stock. So, and occasionally you read these horror stories in the newspaper. Occasionally, like a very wealthy celebrity will find themselves moving into a building that's rent controlled, and they're paying like a preposterously small amount of rent compared to what the place is worth. It does happen sometimes, and it does get into the news, but nothing seems to be done about it. But anyway, so this is basically going to create a permanent shortage and probably a deterioration in the quality of the housing stock, because the cost of maintaining the buildings may be more than the landlords can afford. So there is also a deterioration of the housing stock. In fact, I forgot his name. There's an economist who made a remark about this once. He said the best way to destroy a city is not to bomb it, but to impose rent control on it. It just takes longer. But all right, anyway, so that's the price ceiling. Now, what can happen, according to this graph, the black market price could soar up. You see the demand with 1,000 units, people are in principle willing to pay up to $4,000, which means they can afford to give the landlord a little bribe in here of $2,000 to stay in those units under the table. And this is the black market aspect of it. And of course, that's never good for any economy, because that leads to corruption. Okay, once people start to lose their respect for the law, it's not something they can get back quickly and easily. So all kinds of issues arise here as a result of this. And in the US, at least in small stages, a lot of this is being eliminated, but still there is some of it in different large cities. So anyway, now how about the price floor? This is a minimum price at which a good can be purchased in the market. The classic example is our friend here, the minimum wage. The government is basically saying, listen, employers, here's the supply and demand curves for what we will call unskilled labor. In other words, these are the jobs that anybody can do. Which means there's—
Is the word price ceiling a typo?
Oh, you're right. This is a typo. Thank you for catching that. Yes, that was supposed to say floor. Oops. I'm glad that you are a detail person, because I didn't notice it myself. This is slide. I'll make a change. Jesus, I hate that when that happens so much. Okay.
Me
Yes.
too.
Okay. Oh, so anyway, yes, the unskilled labor. So here's the equilibrium. Let's say that in equilibrium, the minimum, the wage that the market would pay is $8, and 1 million people are working at that wage. The price floor would be up here somewhere. It's above, and the government may come along and say, you know what? You got to pay these people $15 an hour, whether you like it or not. What problem do you see popping up here?
I see the price is increasing.
Well, it is for the lucky few who get to keep their jobs, because look what happens. There's a surplus which cannot be corrected by the market because the price is not allowed to fall back to $8 an hour. So I've got a better diagram up here. Let me go show it to you. There it is. Okay, so imagine this is the current situation, and this is a price, the minimum wage is a price floor. It's a special type of price floor. And I think in the example, we're going to see that here it is, $10 an hour. So initially, 1 million people were working at $8 an hour, and they're all, supply and demand is in balance. And then with this new minimum wage, let's say it's 10, there's a supply of 1.25 million people who want to work at that wage. But guess what? The employers can only afford to hire 500,000 people at that wage. So what we have here is a surplus, which can't be corrected in the market. And here the word surplus is just another name for unemployment. So what that essentially means is that of these million people, half of them got the big fat raise, the other half have no job at all. So, you know, they may say, wow, man, we got to hire a minimum wage, but we don't have a job. So that's not helping them very much, is it? And this, in this context, by the way, what would you say would be the type of black market that would tend to arise in this case? Not so much bribing landlords, but what kind of black market activity might we encounter in this case?
Off the books work.
You know it, off the books, the old off the books. Now, you know what industry has the reputation for a lot of this? What industry do you think has a reputation for having a lot of off the books working going on?
Stocks or like financial stuff?
No, those guys are worried about losing their licenses. No, it's probably construction.
Yeah, I
It's-
was gonna say landscaping, right?
Yes, exactly. Labor intensive jobs where you don't ask people questions like, can you work for $10 an hour today? I'll give you cash and get lost. And a lot of people will say yes to that. And that's how that happens. Why? Because the minimum wage is too high. They can't afford to pay them that much money and still stay in business. Because a lot of companies, like imagine McDonald's, you figure they're making a lot of money, but the way they make their money is to keep their own expenses as low as possible and then selling you the burgers at a very low price and then selling a large volume of those burgers. So if their own costs go up, either they've got to raise the price themselves or else they have to go out of business or let people go. And in fact, if you've noticed in recent years, until COVID came along, they all started installing these computers that were designed so that you could place your order with a computer instead of a person. What was the point of that?
You don't have to pay people if all
That's
the orders
right.
are taken through a computer.
That's right. Exactly. That was their response to the change in the minimum wage. Get rid of people and replace them with machinery. Now we can't use them. I guess they're afraid that if everyone touches them, that they'll get COVID or something. But when COVID is gone, you'll see everyone using those computers again. And the point of it is to reduce the amount of labor. That's it. And this is what's causing that, or at least a lot of it. So anyway, the effect here, the bottom line is that there'll be a permanent surplus of unskilled labor, and it's not possible for them to find work unless they work off the books in the black market. Okay, so that's the reality of this. And now, using the same logic as before, there were 500,000 people who were willing to work for as little as $4 an hour, which means there could be a lot of black market working off the books at $4 an hour, in spite of the official $10 minimum wage. Anyway, so the bottom line here is price ceilings put a limit on the price of a good, which causes a permanent shortage, like rent control, and a price floor prevents the price from falling to its equilibrium level, leading to a permanent surplus, meaning unemployment. So in either case, was that the right thing to do? I don't know. I think it's not looking good, is it? So anyway, what I want to do now, oh, here we go. No, subsidies might be paid directly, like for corn farmers. What they might do is give them what's called a guaranteed price, which means that if the prices fall below a certain level, rather than preventing the price from falling, the government will send a check to the farmers. So that's a little bit different, because on the one hand, it doesn't interfere with the price system, but on the other hand, that means the taxpayers have to pay this money to the corn farmers. So there's good and bad things about that too. So like I did say before, there's many different ways the government can interfere with free markets. Subsidies like that are an example. And then in another class, you'll see how they interfere with free trade by putting taxes on imported goods. There's a lot of ways the government can interfere with the free markets. And usually what ends up happening, yeah, the surplus is a surplus of workers. Exactly. That's the problem. You got all these poor people who can't find jobs because nobody's allowed to pay them what they're actually worth. So in other words, if you have no skills, you're a high school dropout, etc., your work might be worth $8 an hour to somebody, but they're not allowed to pay you $8. They're either required to give you 15 or not hire you at all. And in a lot of cases, they're going to end up not hiring you at all. So it just makes things worse for a lot of people. And in fact, you'll notice that already restaurants in New York City and in Seattle and other places have had to close because of the new higher minimum wages. And this is exactly what will keep happening as long as they don't change it. All right, well, anyway, so what I wanted to say was that there is a video here I want you to see. It's not that long. It does nicely tie together what we've been doing here. So let me go get a hold of it, and I will, hold on. We'll put it in the chat box. And it's always good to watch videos because they always have interesting examples. And, you know, they're kind of fun if they're well produced. And that's kind of nice. And it helps us reinforce all this great stuff we've been learning. So I'm going to post it up here in the chat room. And what happened? Oh, there it is. So why don't we check this thing out? Now, in the meantime, I'm going to pause the recording and let's get started. Wait, what happened there? There it is. There it is. Beautiful.
I'm just wondering why everyone's so quiet right now.
We're watching a video.
Oh,
The link's in the chat.
Okay. All right, is everyone more or less done? All right.
Yeah.
So now you'll never look at strawberries the same way again, will you?
Or the
No.
organs.
They'll stare at them or organs. Wow, that's they really got in some very controversial territory there. I think they're just trying to make the point that not everything is traded through free markets, and that might be one of them. But for strawberries, you can see obviously a lot of things can affect the price of strawberries, like the cost of producing them, let's say the cost of fertilizer or the equipment being used to make it, and the demand for strawberries. They all interact to give us the market price of strawberries. And if people value them less, then they'll buy less of them. And it's just that simple. All right, now, even though it's getting kind of late, we're done with 4, our supply and demand chapter, which really lays the foundation for everything else that follows. But now we're going to start moving into what is really more proper macroeconomics. Up to this point, everything we've done was important, but it also is what you might also see in a micro course. So now we're going to switch gears basically and start doing some topics that are very much macro based. We're going to start with one of the more important ones, which is called, let's get this open. This is chapter 5, by the way. And we're just going to barely start it. Oh, I almost forgot to turn the recording back on. We're just barely going to touch on this today. We're going to look at a very, very important topic in macroeconomics, which is called, as you can see, GDP, which stands for gross domestic product. Wow, what is that all about? Well, it turns out that gross domestic product is a measure of the value of all the goods and services that have been produced in the economy during a given year. So in a way, gross domestic product is to a country what your gross income is to an individual during the year. How much did you make? How much did you get paid? But here we're thinking in terms of what did you produce and how much is it worth? And so this is an incredibly important measure in macroeconomics because ultimately our standards of living depend on this number. The higher it is, the wealthier we are as a country. So that's why so much attention is paid to it. And there's a lot of discussion in the media about GDP growth. How fast is the economy growing? Because that helps it, like I said, determine the increases in our standards of living. Now, in the last year or so, well, even allowing for the COVID, just to get a rough idea, you know what? Oh, I have an idea. Let's do a poll. We haven't done a poll in a while. And this is, I mean, either you know this number or you don't, but let's just find out just for the fun of it. GDP. Now remember, it means the total value of all goods and services produced in the United States during a calendar year. US GDP is approximately, all right, here we go, 200 billion, 2 trillion, 20 trillion, 200 trillion. And this is just to see if you have a feel for what that number should look like right now. Now, like I said, either you know it or you don't. And some of you are saying, I have no idea. And let's face it, these are large, large numbers. And it's easy to get confused with large, large numbers. All right, some of you are reluctant to vote. Wonder why? What's going on there? I'll give you a minute. All right, well, most of you were correct. It is roughly $20 trillion. Man, that's a lot. Now, what's interesting about that is that the US has the largest GDP in the world, and it's not really even close. So, but often economists think that this measure is incomplete. And so what I'd like to show you on the screen here somewhere, hold on. There's a related measure that economists often refer to help us understand how well our standards of living are growing. So there's a related measure called per capita GDP, which means GDP per person. So if you take $20 trillion and divide it by 330 million citizens or people who live here, what does that work out to be? Let me just get this into my calculator and figure it out. That works out to approximately 60,606 per person. So that means in a household of, let's say, 3 people, this is about $180,000 a year. Does that sound about right? Well, of course, keep in mind that that number can be very different from one part of the country to the next. But this is a number which a lot of economists feel is a better measure of our standards of living than the absolute total. And it turns out that this per capita GDP, while we have the largest economy in the world, our GDP per capita is not the largest. But we will talk about that later on in the chapter. There are some countries who have nowhere near the size of our economy, but very small populations. And so because of that, their per capita GDP is actually larger. And some of them will surprise you. We'll get to that later on. I'll save that as a surprise. But one or two of the names on that list of countries with higher GDPs per capita will almost certainly surprise you. All right, so we'll save that. We'll save that for another day. All right, I think you can stand the suspense for a few days. Okay, good. Now, so you've heard this term before, I'm sure you have, the business cycle. The business cycle refers to the natural tendency for GDP growth to go through phases where sometimes it's growing very quickly and sometimes it's growing very slowly or maybe not at all. So if you can imagine, let's see, I may have a picture of it here somewhere. But we go through these cycles. All right, well, maybe I'll find one later. But the economy goes through these periods where it is growing very quickly, which we call an expansion. Then it reaches some limit, It starts to slow down. And then after a while, it reaches the bottom. And then it starts to bounce back. And it goes through the cycle over and over and over again over time. And that's just because, the economy is a very complex thing. And it goes through periods like that where it's growing and then where it's not growing. Something like a sine wave, I guess. It goes up and it goes down, it goes up and it goes down. And this is referred to in the media as the business cycle. Okay. And this is a major component of macroeconomic analysis, trying to understand how the business cycle works, but also trying to figure out how to minimize these downturns and how to maximize the upturns. In other words, once we get into a streak like this, we want to know how to keep the economy rolling along and avoid having these contractions and troughs as much as possible. You can't completely get rid of them, but ideally, you would like to see them kept to a minimum. And so there's a lot of discussion in macroeconomics about policies that are designed to help minimize the severity of the downturns in a business cycle and try to encourage stronger and more frequent expansions. All right, so this is actually a very complex area that we're wading into here. So now that I think about it, maybe we should save all of this for Monday. I don't want to get too far into it and then have to just start all over again. So here's what we'll do. Why don't we all agree that you will read through the notes, chapter 4 and 5, that is, make sure you completely understand everything we did in chapter 4, and then just take a look at 5 to see where we're going next week. All right, so that's all you have to do for now. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, good. All right, so then I'll see you all next Monday.
Stay safe and warm.
Okay,
Thank
you
you very
too.
much, Professor.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Professor.
Have a great weekend.
You too.